In this video, I want to talk about the application performance monitoring that's available in version 8.4 of ElasticSearch and Kibana. With the APM feature, you can monitor the performance of any software that you've instrumented. So as a quick example, let me click to this menu. In the observability section and in the APM, you can see that I am monitoring the performance of two REST APIs. One is written in Golang and the other one is written in NodeJS. I'll click into the NodeJS one and you can see some of the metrics that I'm capturing here. Later in this video, I'll explain a bit more about what some of these metrics mean and how you can instrument your software to capture this kind of information. First, I should demonstrate how to install and configure the APM feature within the Elastic Stack. And then towards the end, I will do a few basic examples of how to instrument the software. So let's talk about installing APM. There's quite a few components you need to be aware of. I have opened up this Elastic website because I think it does a good job of explaining all the components that are necessary. In fact, it's kind of outlined in this diagram right here. Okay. So on the far right, you definitely will need the Elasticsearch server because that's what houses all your data. The other thing you'll need, although not depicted in this image, it's not depicted in this image, but what you'll also need is the Kibana instance, because Kibana is what's going to let you more easily interact with Elasticsearch. I have a video that explains how to set up a clean new instance of Elastic and Kibana. And in that video, I have Elastic installed on one server and Kibana installed on a separate server. You could have it installed on the same server, but I chose to keep them separate. And so you should probably have all that set up before you continue on with this video. I will leave a link to the Elastic Kibana installation video in the description of this video. So just check that out if you need to. The other thing you need is this thing here on the left, which is the software you intend on monitoring. So we'll create a very simple Node.js app and then we'll instrument it so we can monitor the performance of the Node.js app. The next concept you need to be aware of is the concept of the Elastic agent. So the Elastic agent is a software that you put on a server, and its purpose is to, or the purpose for this video is that the agent will receive APM data, process it, and then pass it over to Elasticsearch. There's a more formal definition of what the Elastic agent is up here in this that you can read for yourself. But I just like to think of it simply as the software you put on a server, it processes data and passes it along. One thing you also have to be aware of is that the server that the Elastic agent runs off of, Elastic calls that the fleet server. So I don't have a fleet server set up yet. So when we're doing the APM installation, I'm going to spin up a new Ubuntu server and I'll just call that the fleet server. Once I have that Ubuntu server set up, I'll run the Elastic agent off of it and things should work. All right. So that's the purpose, or that's the definition of the fleet server. The other thing we have to also be aware of is the concept of an agent policy. So every Elastic agent needs to run a single agent policy, and that agent policy is responsible for determining the types of integrations that particular Elastic agent can that is allowed to operate with. So what is an integration? I think it's just easier to demonstrate. I have an instance of Kibana running here. If I click on this menu and you scroll down, there's a tab here called integrations. And you can see that Elastic APM is just one of many different types of integrations that you can employ against an Elastic agent. So other types of integrations are all these Amazon integrations, for example. You can do an Apache HTTP server integration against your Elastic agent, an Apache Tomcat. There's just so many different types of integrations. You need to specify an agent policy because the agent policy will dictate what types of integrations are allowed for a particular Elastic agent. So that's the concept of the Elastic, that's the concept of the agent policy. Which you can see in this diagram here, there are these other services or remote hardware or other monitored services. Those could potentially interact with the same Elastic agent, provided that your agent policy has allowed those types of integrations. All right. So to summarize all the things that we need, we will need ElasticSearch and Kibana. So just follow one of my older videos on how to install that if you need a new instance of it. We are going to go create a very simple Node.js REST API. Then we'll instrument it so it submits performance data to an Elastic agent. That Elastic agent needs to run off of a Fleet server. That Elastic agent also needs an agent policy to dictate what types of integrations are allowed. And the integration we're going to do in this video is the Elastic APM integration. All right, so I think we're pretty much ready to start the APM installation process now. Let's start setting up the APM integration for Elastic and Kibana. To start off, I have a fresh new installation of Elastic and Kibana version 8.4. You can watch one of my earlier videos on how to set all that up. The other thing we are going to need is a new server. I have an Ubuntu 20.04 server set up here with 500 megabytes of RAM and a single core CPU. This server is going to act as my Fleet server. I have a domain name, fleet.evermite.net, reference to the server. That way I don't have to memorize IP addresses. You could choose to keep the Fleet server on the Kibana server or the Elastic server, but since in my Elastic Kibana setup, I have Elastic on its own server, Kibana on its own server, I might as well keep the Fleet server on its own, and each one of the servers have a domain name mapped to them. So I think we should get started. Now, because this is a brand new instance of Ubuntu, I think I'm just going to do some quick updates to it, distribution updates, and grab whatever is necessary. Let's do that. And you know what? I think I also want to install Vim, right? I like this as my text editor. And we are going to need the curl package because curl will be used to download some of the latest Elastic GZ files, right? So I'm going to let this thing go. And while that's updating, let's come back to the Elastic Kibana instance, and we can start telling Elastic what are some of the settings and configurations that we intend to use for the Fleet server. So click on the menu icon, scroll all the way down to management, click on Fleet, and let's click to the settings tab. And here in the settings tab, let's start specifying some of the parameters for our Fleet server. So our Fleet server is going to use SSL, and I already have some Let's Encrypt SSL certificates created ahead of time. So let me just type this in here. And in the middle of our installation process, I'll copy those SSL certificates onto that Ubuntu server. We're going to use the default port of 8220. I have tried using different port numbers, just a wide range, like in the 3000s to like other 8000s, and none of the other ports worked. I don't have any firewall set up in this demonstration, so it's not that's being the issue. There's just something about port 8220 that seems to work, and none of the other ports have worked for me. So if anyone knows what's going on, just let me know. All right, so I'm going to save and apply this setting. So our Fleet server is going to be located at this address on this port. Next, we need to point to our ElasticSearch server. All right, so this was set up in our earlier video. We're using the real SSL certificates here. And because of that, I think this is all you really need to do. You can just press save and apply settings. But if you're using any of the self-signed certificates or certificates that just won't verify, you may need to type in some additional YAML configurations. So let me see if I can grab some of those. So here are the other configurations that might help you if you're using certificates that are not fully verified or if they're self-signed. I find that this option helps the most. By setting SSL.verification mode to none, you're effectively relaxing all security constraints or a lot of the security constraints around SSLs. But your traffic will probably still be encrypted, right? It's just it won't verify the certificate. So for me, just using this seems to be okay. Other times I might actually need to type in a list of certificate authorities. So a full path to the first certificate, full path to yet another certificate if there's like multiple certificates that are required. And you probably have to put these certificates on your actual fleet server and then have the path point to them. Or sometimes you just place in the full chain certificate in this option here and maybe a path to the private key. So any combination of these three might work, or sometimes I just use only this option and that seems to work for the non-verified certificates. But because I am using fully qualified Let's Encrypt certificates, I can just, all I have to do is just edit this one field and I can press save and apply. All right, so we have some of the configurations here set up for the fleet server. I think now we can move on to the agents. And here you can install an agent on the fleet server. We're going to need some configuration options for that. I prefer to avoid the quick start. I just go straight to the advanced. First thing we need to do is create a fleet server policy, right? If you recall, an Elastic agent requires a policy. The policy dictates the type of integrations that are allowed for that Elastic agent, so it can decide what types of data it can consume or what integrations you're about to do. If you actually click to this agent policies tab, you'll see that we don't actually have any created yet, right? Because it's a brand new instance of Kibana and Elastic. So we could have created the agent policy through this tab here, or let's just do it while setting up our fleet server. I'm just going to create the default one. I'll leave this checked. Right, collect system logs and metrics. I've never really meddled around with any of the advanced options here, so I just leave them all as default. Just press create policy and it'll take a few seconds or so for the policy to be made. All right, the policy has been made. I want to deploy in a production-like setting because I have my own certificates. If you chose quick start, Elastic or the fleet server or the Elastic Stack is going to try to create some self-signed certificates. It says that in some of the later commands that you're going to implement, you might need to add the insecure flag. I don't think I was able to use this flag properly. Instead, I had some other flags, which I'll mention a little bit later. But for now, we're going to use a production-like setting and use my own certificates. Yes, I want to use this fleet server host. And let's go ahead and generate the service token. So you have a service token along with the instructions on how to install your Elastic agent down here. And when installing Elastic agent, you see that this token here is basically this token, right? And let's first download the necessary Elastic agent package onto our Ubuntu server or onto our fleet server. All right, so all the updates are done. Let's go ahead and curl that, which might take a few seconds or so. Once we've downloaded it, we want to unpackage the download. All right, so this is done soon, hopefully. Okay, it's still going. The download finally finished. So let's go ahead and unpackage the download. Then we'll go into the folder. And the next command, so once we're in the folder, we are going to run the actual agent installation. Now, because we're using a production-like setting and a few other things from my previous installation, we can't use this command exactly the way it is right now. So I am going to paste it into this window and talk a little bit about it. So yes, this is where the location of our fleet server. This is the location of our Elastic server. This is the token that we grabbed from, okay, so from here, but this is the same as this token. We are about to create the Elastic agent. We are about to create a fleet server policy. Now these two options here, certificate authorities and fleet server Elastic CA or ESCA certificate, we don't actually need it in our installation because we're already using fully licensed or fully verified certificates from Let's Encrypt, so I can skip these two. But what I do need is path to the fleet server SSL certificates. So I'm actually gonna, oh yeah, I actually need to put it on the server first. So let's come back here for a moment. I'm gonna make a directory. And let's say, yeah, okay, so I made that directory and I'm gonna copy the certificates from my local computer onto this server. So I've done this a few times before doing past demonstrations. So I have this command already here. So let's copy it over. All right, so we've copied over the certificates onto our server. And it should all be there, all right. I think the permission should be okay. Yep. All right, so the path to the certificates is this. And we are gonna paste it into here. All right, that's our certificate. And this is our private key. And I think we can use this command as is for our installation. So again, if you're not using fully verified certificates, you may need these two other options, right? You might need to have some other certificates installed on your server, the Elastic certificate and any other certificates, as well as actually one more flag, which they don't mention, or they have mentioned it, this flag. This flag, I never actually got to work with self-signed certificates. Instead, it was another flag. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so it was this flag that I would use, fleet-server-es-insecure, along with some of these other options. Then I was able to get the Elastic agent to install. Otherwise, I would have gotten some errors, or later on, even if the Elastic agent did get installed, I will get like alerts or notices in Kibana that the fleet server is in an unhealthy status. So I'll point to that, explain a little bit more about that as we go. All right. So for now, we don't need this. We're using fully qualified, fully verified SSL certificates. And I think I should be able to just run this command as is like this. It's just terminal window. Yes. And this is going to try to install the Elastic agent. So it might take a minute or so, or maybe it's, oh no, this was pretty fast this time. One thing I look for after the installation is that because this is a production-like setting, I'm trying to make sure there's no mention of self-signed certificates here. Correct, there's none. If this were a demo or I was doing dev and just using the default certificates that came with Elastic, there would be mentioned of self-signed certificates here. But there's none here, so we're good. At this point, there was a spinning wheel here denoting waiting, but now it's turned into a check mark, so everything is good. We could enroll more Elastic agents, but we don't have to. We just need one for APM at this point. And if I hit refresh on this page, or maybe if I click to this tab and click back. No, okay, so if I hit refresh on this page, you will see an agent is now here, okay? And if we ever want to uninstall it, you can actually uninstall it from here. If you want to repeat these exact same steps again, because maybe something broke, you can just do uninstall like this, hit enter, and then just repeat those last few steps from the advanced tab that you saw earlier, right? But everything seems to be working. We have a healthy status here. If it says unhealthy, there's probably something wrong with your settings. Again, I've lost a lot of time with just SSL certificates trying to get this to be healthy. It was always rooted in SSL configuration issues. But this is healthy. If it were unhealthy, it helps to look at the logs here Sometimes the logs might have interesting things. You can filter them by errors or warning. Right now there's a lot of stuff here. These are all the errors, but they never seem to have affected me. Oh, yes, this is because I have some other old software pointing at the server. So that's why we're seeing some of these things, but you can ignore that. But yes, so what we've done so far is we have an agent set up. We've got a fleet server. We've got the agent running on a fleet server. We have the beginnings of a fleet server policy set up. Now we need to apply an APM integration to this policy, because right now this policy allows for these two types of integrations, a fleet server and a system. Now we need to apply APM integration. To do that, you could click here, or sometimes I find it when I was first doing this, I just like to go straight to observability, click to APM, and when you're here using APM for the first time, it will ask you to add the APM integration, which I will do, right? So then you're brought to this page. Let's do an integration with APM. Some of the configurations that we're going to put in here is the integration name, Right, so I'll just say that. We could put in description if we want. I never really worked with any of these advanced options here. It should be fine with default for now. Let's type in the path to our fleet server. All right, and then our APM is going to be on port 8200. So 8220 is the actual fleet server, and this port we're going to reserve for just this APM integration, so that when we create our Node.js app, it's actually going to reference this actual URL like this. Okay. Again, we're going to use SSL certificates, so I'm going to use HTTPS to encrypt all the traffic. I just leave most of these. You can add in additional custom headers for more security if you like. Yes, we want to enable SSL. We already have the certificates on our server. And the private key. And I think that should be good. I leave most of these other options the same. I do want a secret token. So when our Node.js app connects to it, it must specify this token. There are some other options that you can also enable, like the number of keys that can be issued, some throttling limits if you want. So we could turn those on. We could also turn them off. I'll just leave them on. I'll leave these other options as default. Let's append this integration to this fleet server policy. So before, this fleet server policy only had two integrations. By hitting save and continue, save and deploy changes, fleet server policy should now, in a moment, should now have three integrations. All right, so if you click on fleet server policy either through here, or if you actually click on the menu over here, go down to fleet, and then click on agent policies, it will take you to the same place. You can see now we have three integrations, so this policy allows for these three types of integrations. Let's click to agents. Now, sometimes what you might see is a little note here saying out of date, because every time you change a policy, it could take a while for the fleet server to update itself and grab new policies or update policies. I have found in the past, again, because of SSL settings in my APM integration, if I don't specify the correct SSL certificates or just don't have the right settings for TLS, as soon as I add the APM integration, this status would become unhealthy if I have anything incorrectly configured in this Elastic integration. Right? So if any of these settings here are incorrect or problematic, then you could find yourself with an unhealthy status here. And with an unhealthy status here, then the ports for the APM integration will be closed off, or it won't even be running. So I think this should be good so far. We've got the APM integration done, and I can check something. So if I type ls, I'm just going to check scan port, see if port 8200 is actually being used, and it is. So it's up and running. other ports aren't actually being used, but 8200 is now open or available. So I believe we can actually start building our Node.js app and start submitting monitoring data to it. In fact, let's click here quickly. Click to APM. Right. So this time, instead of saying add APM integration, it says add data, because now it's just waiting for you to set up your software, write your Node.js app, and start and instrument your Node.js app so it starts sending performance data here. So let's do that next. So let's create a very simple Node.js app. Let's just create a REST API and have it submit data to the APM integration in Elastic. And we're going to make use of this module here called the Elastic APM Node.js agent. And yeah, it's supported by Elastic. So yeah, a lot of people use it. You can kind of see it here. So let's get started. This is just my own local computer. I have Node.js installed on it, and I've already prepared a script ahead of time. So nothing fancy here. I'm going to use the Elastic APM Node module, which is basically this module here. We have to leave the script right at the top of your app, because then it'll have the downstream effect everywhere else in your code, right? So in it, I will just give a name of my app. I'll just call it Node App 1. I could just as well call it Fancy Car or Mustang or whatever it is. Just type anything you want in here. The secret token we specified in our APM integration. It was test token, so I have to type it in here. This is the path to our APM integration endpoint at port 8200. Oh, you know what? I should change. We're using the 8200 as a default port, which is the default port. Later, I'm going to change it to 82 something, or I'll just change it to something non-standard, right? So we'll do that at the end. Because we are using Let's Encrypt SSL, let's go ahead and verify it, set it true. If you're using self-signed certificates or anything that's not fully verified, just set that to false. And I'll mention the environment is production, but you could also leave that empty. This is an optional field. And the rest is a basic Express REST API setup. All right, just use the Express app, start it up. I'm gonna listen on port 3030. If you just go to the main path, it'll just say hello world. I created a route for a demo, and it'll just say welcome demo. I also created a route called error. It'll print capture error to the website. But behind the scenes, I'm going to actually log an error and tell Elastic's APM that we have an error, and we're going to capture it, and we're going to send this data. But you could just as easily put in a stack trace or any other debug information that you want into here. And we'll start up the API. So that's all this script really does. Let's actually, I don't have anything else in this folder, so I'm going to actually start it up as an actual Node project. Yes. All right, and let's install. All right, so that's basically this module here. Let's install that. Okay, that's done. Let's. We need Express to start up the REST API. And I think that's it. We should be good to go. Let's just run this. All right, listening on port 3030. And I have the URL here. So if we load this up, okay, so we got hello world. And you can see here, if you come back to Elastic, if I refresh this page, maybe I might see something. Or maybe I might not. It might take a little bit of time to... Oh, no, this was pretty fast. So sometimes it might take a few seconds to a minute, depending on how large your database is. It could take a while for some of the data to show up. But you can see right away that we've got a transaction here, right? So this was me pinging the home page. Yeah, and you can just take a look at some of the other metrics that are around here. Right, transactions are here. Right. You can see the metrics, CPU usage, memory usage, just some very high level information. if you click on that transaction that we had, you can get a little bit more detail by scrolling down here, clicking on this. There's just a lot more information to help you with your, for analyzing the performance of your system, right? There are more details here about the browser or the system making, the client making the request. Right? Just a lot of information that can be helpful. Right? Now, if you recall in my code, let's take a look at my code again. I'm just going to stop this for a moment. I also have demo and I have error. So demo will just send another transaction to the APM. The error, I'm capturing this message, trigger error. You know what? I'm going to change this text to something a little bit more eye-catching. All right, so that should be easier to look for. Let's start the service and let's actually hit the demo endpoint. And let's also hit the error endpoint. All right, now if we come back to our dashboards here, it may not have caught yet. Let's just hit refresh. You can adjust the time frames here. Right. Oh, there we go. At least you can see that we have some information about the error already in here. Okay, and there are metrics they can look through. So let's stop this for a moment now, because there's a few things I noticed with the Elastic APM that kind of irritated me initially. So if I wanted a variable path, let's do this. And let's make this a parameter. All right, so let's actually start this up. And now, oh, sorry, I already forgot what I wrote. Let me just see. Right, okay. So now if I type this, right, that's one endpoint, and then I can type in something else in here. If I go back to overview here, hit refresh, or the transactions and hit refresh, we're going to wait for some transactions to appear here. So let's give it a moment. All right, so let's see. There we go. So after a while, you see that this path shows up, even though we've typed in the actual path name. So it's the variable name that shows up. And I found that that's just a thing about this Elastic APM node package. What we can do is actually set the transaction name, because by setting transaction name, you can alter that what appears in the APM. So I'm going to paste this code that I copied from another project, and what I'm going to do is place this variable. So now the transaction name will be /path and then whatever this variable is. So let's try this now. Test 1, test 2. So in a moment, it should appear as /path test1 /path test2. Okay, and it finally showed up as path test1 here and path test2. So another useful instrumentation feature is the use of spans, which you can use to measure blocks of code or the time it takes to execute blocks of code. So if I go here, and let's say I go, I want to, and just any label I want, right? Because then I can quickly identify it when looking through the dashboards. And so we're going to measure the time it takes to execute these 3 lines of code. Right. So now if I go to the error endpoint, Oops. All right, let's just hit this a few times. And now if I just hit refresh for a moment, we'll wait for some of the transactions to appear. I'm looking for the error transaction here, or I can click to the errors tab and see if anything has happened. 3 occurrences. So let's see if I can find. Oh, I should actually look at it in the transactions tab, because in here, I believe I click here, there we go. You can see that the time it took to execute those 3 lines of code would be 3 milliseconds, right? So you can use that to measure the performance of various lines of code. Whoops. All right. Another feature would be the custom context. So if I exit out of here for a moment, let's say I come to, let's say over here, let me see. So what I can do is type apm.setCustomContext, and then I can pass in a JSON object. Let's just say APM, and let's give it some subproperties. It can be anything you want, like this. All right, and let's run this. All right, and let's hit the demo endpoint. And now if I come back to transactions, might take a moment for the demo endpoint to show up. Oh, let's delete this because it's limiting our result set. Is the demo endpoint going to show up? There it is. That would be this one. And within here, what we can do is click to, let's say this one. And I believe it would be down here. So in here, there should be computer or beta computer somewhere. There we go. So you can submit custom information along with your transaction by doing that. Now I also have a Golang app, so you can see that that I prepared ahead of time. Might as well quickly demo it. All right. Also, nothing special here, just another REST API. Right. And I'll go ahead and run this. All right, so it's going to hit that fleet server. I'm running on port 8080 for that one. And I think if I come back to services, there should be a Go app that shows up here momentarily. And there you go. You can see that here. All right. Now, one of the things I mentioned is I want to change the port number on all this, on the APM integration, because I don't want to use the default. And let's just do that quickly to make sure everything works. Let's go over here. Let's go to the fleet. Let's go to agent policies, or go to the integration itself, which is this one. And we're going to update the port numbers here. Let's just pick a different one. I will save the integration. Right, when we do this, the fleet server is going to go through an update. So, or maybe it already did. That was pretty fast, actually, if that were the case. Let me just hit refresh here. Okay, well, sometimes I see it says out of date and it might take a few seconds to a minute for it to update, but looks like that's already there. And if I go back to my Node app, and if I try to run this, it should give me an error because it's on a different port now. Right, connection refused. So let's just use a different port. And there we go. So now that should work. Let's come back here. Yeah, so everything is running. I don't see any error messages here. So it should be okay. In a few seconds, it should appear in our APM. Wait, where's observability? So I think, let's make sure. Well, it will show up here eventually, or maybe it already has. Okay, we'll check back in a moment. But I think more or less that covers everything I can speak of for this first part of APM. I want to do a second video later that speaks to a few more functionalities, especially this alerts area, because this alert area requires a few more setup. It's going to capture, if certain events exceed a certain threshold, you can have it notify you through email or other ways of notifying, or even just seeing here on the dashboard. It'll take a little bit more time to configure. So I'll speak to that in a second video. All right. So let me just double check. There we go. So that path final appeared there. Okay. So I'll create another video shortly.